Where legends breathe again. Eldmyth. Guardians of home and hunters of evil, Bastet, the Egyptian cat goddess, embodies grace, mystery, and ferocity. But what hidden powers did she possess, and how did she shape the lives and beliefs of ancient Egyptians? The silence of the desert night is not truly silent. It breathes, it whispers. And if you listen deep in the bone-dry air of the Egyptian expanse, you might hear the faintest echo of a story, a name carried on the hot wind: Bastet. She is more than a statue in a museum, more than a line in a hieroglyphic text. She is a presence, a paradox of grace and ferocity that has slipped through the cracks of millennia. Before she was a goddess carved in stone, she was a creature of myth, a being of the liminal spaces where the cultivated lands of the Nile met the untamed, star-filled darkness of the desert. Imagine the edge of a moonlit field, the papyrus reeds stirring with a movement that is not the wind. There is no sound, yet a shadow detaches itself from the greater darkness, moving with an unnerving, liquid silence. It is low to the ground, a coalescence of the night itself, with eyes that catch the moonlight not as a reflection, but as an emanation, two chips of molten emerald holding a deep, ancient intelligence. This is the essence of the mythic Bastet, a guardian of the threshold, a watcher in the twilight. Her very nature is a duality as stark as the division between the black silt of the river and the golden sands of the desert. She is the protector of the home, the bringer of health and fertility, her purr a vibration that could soothe a crying child and ensure a bountiful harvest. Yet she is also the untamed hunter, the swift and merciless executioner of chaos, her claws capable of rending the serpent of disorder, Apep, itself. To understand her is to step into a world where the domestic and the wild are not opposites, but two sides of the same sacred coin. Her story begins not in the grand temples of the later dynasties, but in the simple, primal fear and reverence of the earliest peoples who shared their world with the sleek, formidable cats of the Nile. To trace the origin of Bastet is to sift through the sands of pre-dynastic Egypt, a time when the world was populated by spirits, and the line between animal and deity was beautifully blurred. The first whispers of her cult did not emerge from the stone quarries of the pharaohs, but from the sun-baked mud-brick villages of the Nile Delta. Here, in the lush, marshy lowlands, the African wildcat, Felis sylvestris libica, was a constant, enigmatic presence. These were not the docile creatures of a modern hearth. They were sinewy, sharp-eyed hunters, invaluable for their silent, deadly control of the vermin and snakes that threatened grain stores and homes. This practical symbiosis blossomed into a profound spiritual connection. The villagers observed the cat's impeccable motherhood, its fierce protection of its young, its nocturnal prowess, and its uncanny ability to see in darkness. They began to see not just an animal, but a manifestation of a protective, nurturing, yet fiercely independent power. The earliest depictions are not of a woman with a cat's head, but of the cat itself, carved on primitive tags and amulets. She was the Lady of the East, a solar connection born from the observation of a cat's behavior, how it would bask in the life-giving sun, yet its eyes seemed to capture and hold the sun's light, becoming miniature suns in the dark. Her cult center, Bubastes in the Delta, was originally a place of simple reverence for this potent natural force. The very soil of Bubastes was said to be sacred, and to be buried there was to be placed under the direct protection of this nascent deity. This was her true origin, not a decree from a royal court, but a slow, organic deification born from daily life, from the grateful and awestruck eyes of farmers and mothers who saw in the local cat a sliver of the divine, a tangible spirit that walked among them, both comforting and dangerous. As the centuries turned and the kingdoms of Upper and Lower Egypt united, the simple village protector underwent a monumental transformation, ascending into the complex pantheon of state gods. Her domain expanded, and her iconography evolved. The sleek wildcat now often sat upright, adorned with a golden earring in one ear and a utilitarian basket in the crook of her arm, yet she retained the lethal wicker knife, a reminder of her ever-present capacity for violence. She became a daughter of the sun god Ra, a fearsome extension of his wrath. In one of the most potent myths, the aging Ra grew weary of humanity's rebellion and disobedience. Enraged, he sent his daughter, the Eye of Ra, to punish them. This eye was not the gentle Bastet of the hearth, but the savage lioness goddess Sekhmet, the powerful one. She descended upon the earth in a frenzy of bloodlust, her roar shaking the mountains, her breath a pestilential wind. She waded through fields of humanity, her jaws red, her thirst for destruction unquenchable. The land was drenched in red, the color of life and death. Ra, seeing the genocide he had unleashed, felt pity and sought to stop her. But Sekhmet was lost to the blood rage, a force of nature that could not be simply recalled. The gods devised a cunning plan. They flooded the fields of Egypt not with water, but with a vast quantity of beer, dyed a deep, bloody red with pomegranate juice and ochre. The lioness, seeing this lake of crimson, believed it to be a pool of human blood. She stooped to drink, and she drank and drank, lapping up the narcotic liquid until she became so intoxicated, so thoroughly pacified that she forgot her murderous mission. She slept for 3 days, and when she awoke, the rage had passed. She had been transformed back into the gentle Bastet, the pacified protector. This myth is the ultimate expression of her duality. The same power that could scourge the world could be soothed and redirected into benevolent protection. The reverence for Bastet reached its zenith during the later periods of Egyptian history, particularly the 22nd dynasty, when her cult center, Bubastes, became the capital of Egypt. The city was transformed into a place of unparalleled splendor and riotous celebration. The Greek historian Herodotus, visiting centuries later, described the annual festival of Bastet as the most elaborate in all of Egypt. Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims, men, women, and children, would travel by boat down the Nile towards Bubastes. The river would become a floating, joyous carnival, filled with the sounds of flutes and rattles, of singing and laughter, of the rhythmic clapping of hands. As the boats passed riverside villages, people would rush to the banks, shouting jokes, singing songs, and performing dances for the passing pilgrims. Upon reaching the city, a grand procession would wind its way to her temple, a magnificent structure set in a sunken courtyard, allowing pilgrims to look down upon its sacred groves and statues. The air would be thick with the smoke of countless sacrifices and the scent of myrrh and lotus flowers. The climax of the festival was an act of profound personal devotion, the offering of a small bronze or faience statuette of a cat, or in some cases, the mummified body of a beloved family cat, intended to carry a prayer directly to the goddess. The atmosphere was one of cathartic release, a sanctioned time of music, dance, and wine-fueled revelry that echoed the myth of her own pacification. It was a celebration of life, of fertility, of music, and of joy, all protected by the benevolent gaze of the cat-eyed goddess. To stand in the midst of that throng was to feel the power of a deity who was intimately connected to the most vibrant aspects of human existence. Beyond the grand festivals and state mythology, the presence of Bastet was woven into the very fabric of daily domestic life. In the cool, dim interior of a commoner's home, a small terracotta statue of a seated cat might be placed in a niche, a simple altar for the family's prayers. Here, she was not the daughter of Ra, but the practical guardian against vermin, illness, and malevolent spirits. Mothers would whisper prayers to her for the health of their children, and she was considered a potent ally in childbirth, her protective nature extending to the most vulnerable. The punishment for harming a cat, even accidentally, was severe, often death, a testament to how deeply this reverence was encoded into the culture. This was not mere superstition, it was a recognition of a sacred contract. The cat protected the home from physical threats like snakes and rats, and in return, it was afforded the highest honor and protection. This relationship created a unique bond. Egyptian art is filled with tender, informal scenes of cats living in households. They are shown sitting under chairs, playing with string, or being tended to with affection. When a family cat died, the entire household would go into a state of profound mourning, shaving their eyebrows as an outward sign of their grief. The body would be carefully prepared, anointed with spices and oils, and wrapped in fine linens, before being taken to the temple precincts to be mummified and offered to the goddess. This practice was not just about religion. It was an expression of genuine love and loss for a creature seen as both a pet and a divine familiar, a small piece of Bastet's spirit that had chosen to share their home and their lives. The myth of Bastet is inextricably linked with that of her opposite and complement, the lioness goddess Sekhmet. Where Bastet represented the pacified, benevolent power, Sekhmet was the unleashed, destructive force. Yet they were not two separate entities, but two sides of the same divine coin, the Eye of Ra in its different aspects. This duality was a profound philosophical concept for the Egyptians, representing the fine balance between order, Ma'at, and chaos, Isfet. Bastet was the protector of Ma'at within the home and the kingdom, using her controlled strength to ward off chaos. Sekhmet was the chaos bringer, the scorching desert wind, the plague, the untamed fury that had to be unleashed upon the enemies of order, but which always risked going too far. This relationship is beautifully illustrated in a lesser-known myth involving the god of perfume and medicine, Nefertum. It was Nefertum who was often tasked with soothing the raging Sekhmet, using the very tools of his trade, sacred oils, lotus blossoms, and incantations. He would approach the lioness, not with weapons, but with offerings of sublime beauty and fragrance, reminding her of the pleasures of peace and the serenity of the blue lotus that rose from the primordial waters. In some tales, it is the scent of the lotus, offered by Nefertum, that begins the process of calming her, a prelude to the great pacification with beer. This mythic interplay shows that the Egyptians understood that destructive forces could not simply be defeated. They had to be understood, appeased, and gently guided back into harmony. Bastet, in her final, gentle form, was the successful result of that divine diplomacy. The encounter between the divine and the mortal in the tales of Bastet is rarely one of direct conversation, but rather of subtle influence and poignant consequence. Consider the story of a young priestess, Merit, who served in a minor temple of Bastet in a provincial town. She was devout but lonely, her only confidant a sleek black temple cat she named Nebt, meaning lady. One season, a plague swept through the town, and Merit fell gravely ill. In her fevered dreams, she saw not the gentle cat, but the lioness, Sekhmet, stalking the streets, her breath the pestilence itself. But in her own small room, the real Nebt remained, curled steadfastly at her side, purring a low, constant vibration that seemed to cut through the delirium. The local physicians had given up hope. On the third night, as Merit hovered between life and death, she awoke to see Nebt sitting upright, her emerald eyes fixed not on her, but on a dark corner of the room. The air grew cold, and a shape seemed to coalesce from the shadows, a formless spirit of disease sent by a rival, jealous god. Nebt did not flee. She arched her back, her fur standing on end, and let out a hiss that was not of this world, a sound that tore at the very fabric of the air. She launched herself into the darkness, and Merit saw a flash of impossible light, a glimpse of something far larger and more leonine than her small companion. There was a silent, furious struggle, and then the oppressive presence vanished. The room grew warm again. Nebt returned to her side, licking a paw with mundane grace as if nothing had happened. By morning, Merit's fever had broken. She knew, with a certainty that would guide the rest of her life, that the myth was not a story. It was a truth that walked beside her, a protector that had chosen to wear the humble form of a cat to guard her in the darkest hour. As the world changed, and the empires of Greece and Rome absorbed Egypt, the figure of Bastet began to transform, her identity merging with other deities in a process known as syncretism. The Greeks saw in her their own Artemis, the independent huntress and protector of women, and so she became known as Bastetartemis. Her image softened further in some depictions, becoming more graceful and less severe. However, this cultural absorption also diluted her unique character. The profound, ancient duality of the Egyptian understanding, the constant, taut balance between the nurturing cat and the vengeful lioness, began to fade, replaced by a more one-dimensional, if still powerful, goddess of the moon and the hunt. The grand temples of Bastet fell into disrepair, their stones quarried for other cities, their sacred lakes silted over. The riotous festivals ceased, their music replaced by the silence of the desert wind. For centuries, her memory persisted only in the cryptic writings of historians like Herodotus and in the millions of mummified cats that were eventually discovered by modern archaeologists, a discovery that was both awe-inspiring and tragic. In the 19th century, these mummies were often treated as curiosities, even ground up for fertilizer, a stark and disrespectful end for creatures once considered divine. The sacred contract had been broken, and the goddess who had once commanded the fear and reverence of millions seemed to have retreated entirely into the realm of forgotten legend, her story buried under the sands of time and shifting beliefs. Yet a myth as potent as that of Bastet never truly dies. In the modern era, she has experienced a remarkable resurgence, not as an object of state worship, but as a powerful symbol in popular culture and neo-pagan spirituality. She stalks through the pages of fantasy novels and comic books, a figure of feminine power, independence, and mystical intuition. She appears in video games as a patron of rogues and hunters, her agility and night vision translated into digital attributes. For contemporary pagans and witches, Bastet is a living deity, invoked for protection, for fostering independence, for healing, and for connecting with the mysterious and often misunderstood nature of the feline spirit. Her duality is once again embraced. She is called upon for gentle comfort and for the fierce defense of one's personal boundaries. This modern interpretation may lack the historical specificity of ancient Egypt, but it captures the essential, timeless spirit of the creature, a being that cannot be fully tamed, that moves with grace between the world of the seen and the unseen, the domestic and the wild. She represents a re-enchantment of the world, a reminder that the divine can be found not only in grand temples, but in the quiet companionship of an animal that deigns to share our lives, yet whose soul remains forever its own. The whisper of her name no longer echoes through the desert, but through the digital networks and spiritual circles of a world that, perhaps, needs her balancing presence more than ever. So what in the end is the enduring truth of Bastet? She is not merely a historical artifact, a curious footnote in the study of ancient religions. She is a profound and lasting archetype, born from the human soul's attempt to understand the complex forces of nature and our own place within it. She embodies the essential tension between civilization and the wild, between the nurturing hearth and the untamable desert, between the comforting purr and the defensive hiss. The ancient Egyptians, in their profound wisdom, did not see these as contradictions to be resolved, but as complementary forces that required constant, careful balance. To honor Bastet was to acknowledge that the same power that guards your home must be fierce enough to destroy what threatens it, that the same spirit that brings joy and music must have known rage and chaos to truly appreciate peace. Her story is a mythic lesson in the management of power, the recognition that true strength lies not in unchecked fury, nor in passive gentleness, but in the conscious, deliberate choice between them. As we look at the cats that still share our homes, with their inscrutable eyes and their mercurial moods, we are witnessing a living echo of that ancient mystery. They remind us that some spirits are never fully owned, only respectfully accompanied. And in the quiet of the night, when the world sleeps, perhaps they still walk the threshold, guardians of an old magic, their eyes holding the light of a forgotten sun, watching, always watching. Another legend fades, but the next awaits. Like this video, subscribe and continue the journey through myths.